It was while I was sitting at the piano trying to write about love and sunny things, and now we're into World War I and nonstop tragedies. Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Starr, and this is my channel Not Bad Films. Today I will be interviewing my brother to talk about a music project he is working on, or I guess is you're finished with at this point in terms of composing it.
I finished composing it, yes.
And there's an upcoming performance for it. But I wanted to sort of talk to you about why this piece and learn a little bit more about why this inspired you so much. And I think people sort of will connect to the story a bit. So you've chosen to dedicate, I think we said it was 4 years of your life to writing this music.
Yeah.
Vera Brittain and Winifred Holtby.
Correct, yeah.
Who are these two women and why them?
It all begins in 2017 when I was looking to, I was looking forward to a performance at Carnegie Hall of my work.
Sure.
And I knew that at that time, my 12 pieces for solo piano would be featured at my Carnegie Hall performance. But that wasn't quite enough music. I needed to flesh out the program a little bit. So I started to think, well, okay, I need to write a new piece. And this is Carnegie Hall. So, gosh, I better come up with something really unique and special.
Yeah.
And I started to think about different ideas. And I started to sit at the piano and just play with different chords and think about it from a musical perspective.
Sure.
But then I thought, well, that's not enough. So I started to think about universal themes.
Yeah.
What should this piece be? Should it be about love? I thought maybe. Well, with love, there's also loss. There's all kinds of things related to that. Sure. And then as I was working on different ideas, I happened to turn on the TV on a break, and this movie was on. This movie right here. And Testament of Youth, James Kent film from 2014. And it was about someone named Vera Brittain, played by Alicia Vikander, and Kit Harington co-stars. And I thought, wow, this is an incredible story. So I started to read about her. I knew nothing about her. And I felt really drawn to her story. And the more I read about her, the more I realized, especially thinking about what was happening in the country at the time.
And so, what time period is she?
Okay, well, yeah, she was born in 1893.
Okay.
And so she grew up in Buxton, which is in the East Midlands of the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And she led a pretty sheltered Edwardian life. She really wanted to go to school, to Somerville College. She had aspirations of being a writer, but at that time, women didn't often have access to education.
Yeah.
Her parents did not want her to go. She battled her father. Her tenacity won the day, and she went off to Oxford to study. But then war broke out in the summer of 1914.
And that'd be World War I.
World War I, yeah, also known as the Great War, the war to end all wars. Sure. And that
that didn't work, but yeah.
So that, of course, the war, like everyone else in her generation, the so-called lost generation, that war completely and utterly changed her life. I was just going to write this one piece, but I got really caught up in her story.
So, well, in regards to World War I, like, what was her specific involvement in that, or how would that directly change?
Well, she was like many young women who were middle class and upper class. They, when the boys, signed up for that war.
Oh yeah.
It was not like say Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s in the United States, where people were protesting war and didn't want to go off to fight in a foreign land. These young men readily signed up, and they were excited. They had no idea what was awaiting them.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be near the action too. Her fiance and her younger brother, Edward, signed up she wanted to be near them. She wanted to do her part. And so she signed up for the Voluntary Aid Detachment, which was a civilian nursing corps. What she saw, there was so much naivete with her generation, but what she saw was, of course, very traumatic. She had, I believe, 5 postings, and eventually she's in Étaples in France, and she's really close to the action. She's really seeing the horror unfold in this first mechanized war. And she's the only woman, I would argue, to write in depth about that war, to chronicle that war, and really capture the ethos of her generation equal to any of her male counterparts.
She wrote a book about that experience?
Well, yeah, she did. And it took her a while to do this because, again, it was a lot to process. Yeah. And so in 1933, the war, of course, ends in November of 1918. But in 1933, her memoir is published, and it's called Testament of Youth. I started reading this book by Vera Brittain, and it was like, that's what a great writer does. When certain writers we don't feel a connection to, but others we do. And I instantly felt like this huge connection to her. And she was writing so poignantly and searingly about losing someone that she loved. The fact that she was so resilient and she just kept going in her life, and she found a way to keep going. My world, my sense of self, everything just expanded so much when I was introduced, in a way, through her writing to this woman in history. And she really inspired me and moved me. She truly did. Some 1,500 nurses on all sides died during that war. Wow. It wasn't just soldiers who lost their lives. She helped men on both sides. She was, and this brings about a huge transformation in her life, because she's assigned to the German ward. Now she's caring for wounded and dying German men. And she really, again, this really transforms her because she sees that suffering is something very universal. I think in the movie they say, her character says, their pain is our pain. She sees the universal horror of this on both sides, both the Central Powers and the Allied forces. And this changes her life, and she becomes a campaigner for peace. She gets really involved with the women's movement, with feminism, and but it really began with Vera, learning about her life and wanting to share that with others, and trying to find a way through music to kind of somehow bring to life her story. And I also came up with the idea of before each movement, both on the recording I plan to do and live in concert, that a narrator will be on stage reading poetry before each movement.
And these are her
poems by Vera Brittain and Winifred Holtby, respectively.
Got it. And who's Winifred?
Well, Winifred. So after the war, Vera goes back to Oxford to finish her education, and she meets Winifred. And at this point, I think, Vera is pretty traumatized. She lost her fiance, who she never really got over that. She lost her brother. She loved her brother. So they had such a close relationship. And he died under strange circumstances. It's likely that he may have lived and survived the war, but he was a homosexual. And towards the end of the war, it was found out. And he would have been disgraced and court-martialed, probably thrown in prison. It was illegal. You couldn't be in the services and be gay. And so he stood up in Italy and was killed. and likely in a way that was a kind of a form of suicide. And she found this out later on. All these things are traumatic. Two other really close friends died as well, two other male friends. And then years later, her father, who was suffering from terrible depression and really suffering over the loss of his son, committed suicide. So it's a lot of tragedy here. But Winifred really, she helps to keep Vera together. She's really a guiding force. Really brings a lot of forward momentum into her life. She's there as a friend to sort of pick up the pieces, help her learn to cope, help her get on with her life.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, if I feel like maybe we talked about this once before, but I mean, Winifred's story is pretty interesting too.
So she was at Oxford, and she was one of the first women to graduate from Oxford.
Got it. Okay.
Her big thing was this, she left a small legacy of books to start a library specifically for Black people, because they didn't have access. They were barred from going to the library and reading in South Africa, in Soweto, And so it's like, wow. She was described as a very sunny, her disposition was very sunny. She was a very loving and caring person, very tall. She was like a Viking, they said. And whereas Vera was short, she was 5'3". And so Winifred really, in a lot of ways, took care of Vera and her children later on in the 1930s. Okay. Until her own death. She died young at age 37 from renal failure.
My goodness.
Yeah, so that was another devastating blow for Vera, to lose her friend who died of this Bright's disease, it's called.
I mean, we started this, where did this project come from? It was while I was sitting at the piano trying to write about love and sunny things, and now we're into World War I and nonstop tragedy. So the music I've written, really, when I listen back to it, there's some darkness in there, but I think it's pretty. The music's really sort of ascending and angelic in ways, and there's a lot of. I think I say this humbly. I think a lot of beauty in the music. I certainly didn't set out to write something really heavy and really, really dark. I'm trying to write music that celebrates two visionary women, and by extension, that celebrates women and the contribution of women in society and all that collectively they've done to make the world a better place. When I think about, as your brother, as your younger brother, right? Yeah. And I've watched you grow up through a different lens, and there was certainly a long period of time in your life when you were really dedicated to writing plays and to writing narrative. Why tell their story by music? What do you think music lends to being able to tell that story that other avenues might not? You mentioned there's a movie. I'm sure there's certain books about this already.
Yeah, there's many books, and there was in the 1970s, there was a TV series starring Cheryl Campbell. My view is that music can tell a story like nothing else. Music really speaks to our emotions instantly. Music is the way in which I communicate the best. It's my best talent. Whatever I have to offer, that's really my tool. I think ultimately what I'm trying to convey is not just about these two specific people in history. Yeah. The music has a very explicit historical narrative in a way, but really I'm trying to express what I think they ultimately were seeking, and that is something universal about the human condition, about the human experience, which covers such huge topics as love and loss and suffering, but also resilience and perseverance. Do something with tragedy. You can't just crawl up in a ball and give up. I think overall, if I were to distill this down, this music is about the concept of keeping going. You have to keep going in your life. These women were really progressive. They were trailblazers. They were really ahead of their time. What can we learn from them that we can apply to our lives now, to contemporary life? Mm-hmm. I'm tired of writing music that's just about me and my thoughts. I would really, more and more, I want to write music that is connected to something greater than myself. I don't represent Vera Brittain and Winifred Holtby or women. I don't speak for them. Hopefully, what I'm doing in a unique, artistic, creative, and imaginative way adds to the great conversation about some of these issues.
You're doing this whole thing about Vera Brittain. Is this like sort of approved by her family or estate? Like, are they involved in this in any way?
I've gotten support in the go ahead and green light from her executor,
from the Vera Brittain estate.
Yeah, and he represents the family. I do use an excerpt of music in the fifth movement of my piece dedicated to Vera, which this excerpt is a piece by her brother, Edward Brittain. He was an aspiring composer and violinist. And I needed to get permission to use this.
I think that's really like, just even like the little bit of his story and his sad passing, those right. circumstances, the fact that music is in this, and in a way that like the estate sort of given permission to include that is really pretty touching sort of moment. Just even hearing about it now, it's really incredible.
Well, thank you. I am really moved myself by his music. When I hear that music being played, I tear up every time. Yeah. Because he didn't live to pursue music. He didn't live to pursue his life. His life was cut short at such a young age. And now here it is. I had a rehearsal with Michelle, the pianist, and we were in a church rehearsing. And you could hear it just up into the rafters of the church. Yeah. This piano, she's playing his music, and it gave me goosebumps, and it was just so beautiful to hear that music come alive.
When we were talking before about why tell their story via music, I mean, the ability to do that is perhaps one of those answers as to why music, because how else can you really communicate that,
Right. It just, I don't know. I would like to think, I hope that if somehow he knew that it was being performed, that would be a happy thought for him. I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't, but
maybe he'd be embarrassed, or who knows?
I don't know. But I think it's a nice piece, and it's worthy of performance. So we're going to bring it to life.
That's great. To now sort of shift gears slightly and talk about the music itself.
Yeah.
If someone's trying to sort of get a sense of where you're coming from as a composer, or this piece of music, what instruments is this written for? What composers have influenced you? How did you approach writing this? Are there any sort of specific technical or thematic things that you tried to explore during its creation?
Well, so again, briefly going back to Carnegie Hall, I wanted to write, I just decided, I don't really know why, maybe a little mysterious, but I love the cello. And I thought, I've never really written for cello. I wrote some music for a string quartet and saxophone. You remember, that was premiered in Poole, England. With
Ian Ballamy. That was with Ian Ballamy on saxophone,
Ian
right?
Ballamy, yeah.
Ian Ballamy. Yeah.
But I had never written for cello, really featuring the instrument. And it's a beautiful instrument because it has such a huge range, and it has so it's such an emotional range too, I think. And I love piano. So I thought, piano and cello, what am I going to do for piano and cello? Then I wrote one movement, for these two instruments. And I thought, well, I think this is going okay. I think I can do this. So buoyed by the Carnegie Hall concert, I thought, well, let me expand upon this.
Yeah.
And before long, I had written 5 movements that was part of this music as a tribute to Vera Brittain.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, okay, now I'm really into this, but I still don't have a concert's length of music. Okay. So I need to keep going. So I wrote 2 more pieces. And I thought, well, the concert program that I started to envision really needed to be broadened even more. And if I'm going to write about Vera and really try to tell her story, I have to tell Winifred Holtby's story. Now I have 7 movements of music, and before each, for piano and cello, the final piece is just solo piano. So 6 for cello and piano and 1 for solo piano. And before each movement, a poem by one of these authors is read.
How long is that performance in total, would you say?
Well, with the poetry, I think we haven't performed it yet, but I estimate it to be around 65 to 70 minutes.
Got it. And
which is about a typical recital length.
Sure, yeah. All right. This is an on-the-record pop quiz.
Okay.
What is the first and last note of the entire suite?
D.
D?
Yeah. There's one of the things that is carried through all of the pieces, all of them, is sometimes it's more subtle than others, is a repeating note. D. Dun, 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 dun. The first movement of Between the Sandhills and the Sea, the Vera Brittain tribute, begins with that. That's what you heard at Carnegie Hall. Just the note D. I'm probably not singing D. I don't have perfect pitch, but D over and over, symbolizing time and the movement. Like I kind of imagine like going back in time into her era. But the movement of time, and that's the name of that particular movement as well. And I use repeated notes, not always D, and the other movements too. It's always kind of like that shows up. The clock is always ticking in the piece, in all 7 movements. You'll hear this coming in there sometimes, that sort of clicking talk.
Do you think that...
Wait, I said that wrong. Ticking clock. I said clicking talk.
Clicking talk. Yeah, so I might leave that part in just for my own amusement.
Yes, all right. Got it.
Do you think like that concept of putting sort of this sense of time into the music is because of your percussion background?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But also, when you're creating music, I think that you have to allow yourself, you have to open yourself up to the most fanciful ideas.
Yeah.
Just, edit later on. Just open yourself really wide. Open the valve totally. And allow the craziest ideas to come in. And I imagine everything. I really do. I think that creativity is unbound and needs that free-flowing current. So I imagine that I'm going back in time. Mm-hmm. There I am, and I'm seeing these soldiers, or I'm seeing the nurses. I'm seeing a clearing station or a hospital ward, and I'm trying to imagine what's that like. What are their faces like? Do they ever smile? What does it smell like? Ugh, right? What's the lighting like? What are they wearing? Now, of course, I've done a lot of research and I've looked at a lot of photographs too. But I think it's really important to try and imagine these things as much as you can and put yourself there. In your imagination, try to put yourself back there. If you're going to write music that is attempting to connect to that story. To write about this stuff, you really have to open yourself up as much as you can.
And were there times in this where you might open yourself up and choose an idea or try to explore one, and you'd write huge sections, and then you'd realize it just wasn't working, and you'd have to scrap that part?
This piece came to me relatively easy. It was just like the ideas were flowing.
Really?
I was really ready to write this work. And by saying this work, I mean all 7 movements of it. There was never a time where I was in great conflict about anything. There were times where I had uncertainties and self-doubt. It wasn't a perfect journey, but I think it's the most free-flowing work I've done. And I hear that in the music. I don't know if anyone else will. To me, it really has a very natural flow to it in its design. And well, that's how I feel anyway. And I hope others will, agree. But it's not up to me to judge. I can only create it. It's up to others to make pronouncements and judgments on its value or worth.
Well, that's what the internet's for.
That's right.
There is a performance coming up, and that's in Iowa, right?
Yeah. So
how did that come about? Like, when I think about, contemporary classical World War I themed pieces, Iowa is maybe not the first place that comes to mind, just because I don't know anything about Iowa. So why Iowa?
There's a lot going on there where the university is, University of Iowa. And they have a beautiful, beautiful new hall, Voxman Music Building. And it's gorgeous, really contemporary hall. So the cellist, Hannah Holman, who I've been working with, she performed at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
She helped me to get those dates booked in the Midwest. The concert that will be live streamed is at the University of Iowa and the Voxman Music Hall.
Great. Well, when you have the information for the live stream for that, make sure you send it to me, because I'll put it in the video description and in a comment below so people can find that. We have this upcoming performances, but this next phase really now is to try and record this whole thing. That's a very big endeavor.
Huge. I don't think the average person may not realize how much goes into that.
Yeah. So like,
I don't even realize it. It's there's the various stages of recording. There's tracking. You have to make sure that it's world class. There's no point in and so we're going to record in Manhattan. I don't have the dates yet.
Sure.
And
are you still using that you used a really fancy piano on the last recording, correct?
It'll be the same. Yeah, it'll be the same, which is important. With pop music, people might use a keyboard or something, and they're in their home studio, with plugins, and they're at their desk in their digital audio workstation. But this is old school recording. We're going to be using a Steinway D, which is the full concert piano. I mean, that's the big guy, and cello, and it's not easy to capture these acoustic instruments.
Yeah, well,
we're not just plugging in, going direct. So it takes a lot of time to set up mics, and you have to have really the best mics. We'll probably use a minimum of 8 mics on the piano. Close mics, room mics, etc. I was going to say, not to cut you off, but I'll do it anyways. Like in pop music, this is not to detract against pop music or rock music or anything like different.
That. It's just very different. In this instance, you're recording 2 instruments, piano and cello, both of which have very specific sort of tones and resonance, and there's a wide dynamic range of sound, and that needs to be captured, all those little bits. And anyone who's watched other videos on this channel knows that getting a recording to sound right is incredibly difficult at times with an acoustic instrument. So to have these two instruments that are your star instruments, they better sound magnificent, and of course you got to get the perfect performances too, because it's
right. And I mean, this is not easy music. It's really challenging, and this is a good amount of it. So yeah, it's a big endeavor, you know, and it's tracking and editing, then mixing. And you might think, well, mixing, you know, just two instruments, but when you have many mics on each, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. So the mixing is not as easy as one might think. Then of course mastering, and then, you know, you have to deal with other costs like digital distribution and all of that stuff. And plus the musicians, I won't ask musicians to perform for free.
No.
So, you know, that's part of it, and that's the pact. You know, I'm a musician too, and I work as a hired performer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into this. It's a very, very expensive endeavor.
Even just, I would imagine, just your rehearsal times.
Yeah.
You know, going into that recording, your engineering times. Just, I mean, just getting those mics set and hearing how they're going to sound together, and phase issues and all sorts of technical mumbo jumbo that might sort of interesting to someone like myself and our other brother. But yeah, it's
tough. You know, where I plan to record, the guy we will work with is really masterful at his craft and does a lot of recording of chamber instruments. So, you know, hopefully there won't be too many scary moments, but but it's still a lot of work, and it's a lot of pressure on the musicians to really get it right.
Yeah.
You know, you're sort of under the, you know, a microscope really when you are in a recording studio, and it has to be perfect. So it's a lot. It's a big job.
And you're funding this through Kickstarter, correct?
Yeah. That's really, you know, something. Crowdfunding is really common now, as I'm sure you're following.
I'm well aware. Anyone who's watching this is welcome to join my Patreon to help make more content like this.
Yeah, I mean, in the old days you had record labels, and of course labels are still around.
Sure.
But the vast majority of musicians are really self-funded these days, as you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a Kickstarter campaign going right now through November 5th.
Okay.
And we just started it about 5 days ago.
Yep.
And I'm trying to raise $14,000, which is really about the bare minimum just to cover these expenses and pay my musicians. So yeah, you know, if people go to you know, there's a huge link, which
I'll put links on screen and in the description. What happens if this November 5th deadline passes and you haven't reached your goal? Is it all gone then?
It's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Then it's back to the drawing board. I'm in the fight for my life on this.
You know, when I've done these interviews with other musicians, you know, the main thing that is the thread, let's say, through all of that is just that passion to, whether it's to practice or to learn their craft, or to, you know, music is this thing that's, once you're hooked by it, it's very hard to explain, sort of, I guess. But
right.
This is a really big, amazing project that you're doing. I view it as important, but I think that it is, you know, it's not just important because you're my brother. Like, I think it's important because this type of music doesn't maybe get made otherwise, you know?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's kind of probably a niche market, you know, music for cello and piano that's, you know, historically connected to people who lived quite a while ago now.
Yeah.
And often people are not thinking about history enough, in my opinion. But I think when we do think about history, we want to put it into the context of, why are we thinking about history? Why are we thinking about persons in history? And ultimately, the question asked is, what can we learn? What what did they do in their lives that can help us in our lives, in the present, and as we look towards hopefully a brighter future? Do they have lessons for us, that we can apply to our current situation?
If anyone wants to hear music that you've already composed and recorded, obviously not directly 100% the same as this, but to just hear any of your music and projects, they're all on the various streaming services, Apple Music, Spotify, etc.
Everywhere.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
What would you say, would the 12 pieces for solo piano be probably the best entry point for similar?
Well, if you're looking for, if you like so-called contemporary classical, that 12 pieces for solo piano, featuring Michelle Alvarado on piano, would be a good entry point. And then I have 2 vocal jazz albums titled She and Such is Life, also available. If you go to my website, all of that is listed there too.
And your website is?
ericstarmusic.com.
Great. So this is now, I'm going to completely change gears.
Okay.
To end on a bit of perhaps levity. And
I know this is some heavy stuff, right?
One might describe it that way.
Yeah. How I'm not a comedian.
If you were if you're gonna okay, here we go. Here's the question. Here's the big one.
Yeah. All right.
Favorite topping on pizza?
Well, pepperoni.
Okay.
Or canned mushrooms.
For anyone who isn't my family, that is a complete inside joke and a dig at my other brother, who is not like canned mushrooms, but we like to tease him and say that he does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Pepperoni and canned mushrooms. Those are my favorite.
Yeah. But in seriousness, I'm actually surprised you didn't define the pepperoni more explicitly and describe the
Roni cups, Buffalo Roni cups. Yeah. That's the only way.
Yeah, where it sort of curls and it chars up and it gets a little oil pool in there.
Yeah, and I want to go on record, by the way, since we're talking about Buffalo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Buffalo still has great wings. If you go to the right places, there are places that have great wings. So I'm countering Alton Brown, who went on Sean Evans' Hot Ones, and dissed Buffalo.
Okay.
Alton, he just dissed Buffalo. He said Buffalo doesn't make good wings anymore.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because my next interview was with Alton Brown, and he was really looking to fund a cello and piano
I know
project, but I guess that's out the window now.
It's out the window. It's all right. It's okay.
For anyone, like I said before, if you want to learn more about this, please visit Eric's Kickstarter. Links all over the place so that you can get there easily enough. There's a whole bunch of different tiers that you can support this project at. So don't feel intimidated that you can't contribute, because certainly everyone can. There we go.
Okay, cool. Are we done?
Yeah, we're done. That's it.
All right, I
don't have a really good ending to these. They just sort of end. Even though you're my brother, I always start by asking you grant permission to having this interview recorded.
Yes, I do.
Great. I also love our complete contrast. You're very well groomed with a tie, and I've just left my hermit's cave. No, this is all off the record.
Better has to be. You better not show up on an outtake.
No.